Rain fell heavily over the giant city. Cold wind moved between tall metal buildings, while neon lights reflected across the wet streets below. Flying cars crossed the dark sky far above. But down near the lower districts, everything felt dirty, old and forgotten. Large security drones moved slowly between buildings. Their red scanning lights passed across windows, alleys, and empty sidewalks. Every few seconds, a cold robotic voice echoed through the streets. City curfew remains active. Citizens must return home immediately. Most people ignored the sound and walked faster. Nobody wanted problems with security forces tonight. Daniel pulled his old jacket tighter and continued walking through the rain. His boots splashed through dirty water while factory smoke filled the cold night air. He looked exhausted after another 14-hour shift at the machine factory. His whole body hurt. His hands were covered in oil and small cuts. But this was normal life for him. Daniel lived alone in one of the oldest apartment buildings in the city. The building stood near the industrial zone where poor workers tried to survive every day. As Daniel entered the narrow alley beside his apartment, the city suddenly felt quieter, too quiet. The rain continued falling softly. Water dripped from broken pipes above him. A weak light flickered near the stairway entrance. Then Daniel heard something strange. Knock, knock. He stopped walking immediately. The sound did not come from a door. It came from somewhere deeper inside the alley. Daniel slowly turned around. At first he saw only darkness, trash containers, and rain falling through the red drone lights above. Then he noticed something moving behind an old metal container. Two small glowing blue eyes stared directly at him. Daniel's heart began beating faster. For several seconds neither of them moved. Then the figure slowly stepped out of the shadows. It was a child, but not human. The small girl looked about 8 years old. Her skin was pale with faint glowing lines across her arms. Long white hair stuck to her wet face because of the rain. Her large blue eyes looked terrified. She wore torn gray clothing covered with dirt and burn marks. Small bruises covered her arms and neck. One side of her face had dried blood near the ear. The child looked weak, cold, and exhausted. Daniel took one slow step backward. Everyone knew about aliens. For months, the government had warned citizens about possible alien threats hiding inside human cities. News channels constantly showed images of attacks, explosions, and military battles in space. People were told never to help unknown alien life forms. The small alien child suddenly grabbed her own arm tightly and looked behind her in fear. That was when Daniel heard it too, a low mechanical humming sound above the buildings. The red lights became brighter, security drones. 3 black drones slowly moved across the sky toward the alley. Their scanning lights passed over windows, walls, and rooftops. The child panicked immediately. Without warning, she ran toward Daniel and grabbed the back of his jacket tightly. Daniel froze in shock. Her small hands were shaking badly. She tried to hide behind him while breathing quickly in fear. Then the drone stopped directly above the alley entrance. A bright red scanning beam suddenly moved across the ground. Warning, the robotic voice echoed loudly. Unregistered alien life form detected. Daniel looked up as the drone slowly lowered closer. Pedestrians at the far end of the street immediately began running away. Windows closed all around nearby buildings. Nobody wanted to become involved. The child pressed herself closer behind Daniel. He could hear her frightened breathing. Then one of the drones projected a large holographic warning into the rain. Citizens must report all alien contact immediately. Daniel swallowed nervously. He knew exactly what would happen if security forces found the child. Nobody ever saw captured aliens again. The drone lights suddenly focused directly on him. "You," the robotic voice said. "Step away from the life form." Daniel looked down at the child for a moment. She slowly looked up at him with terrified blue eyes filled with tears. For a second, Daniel remembered something from many years ago. His younger sister during the evacuation wars, small, scared. crying while soldiers shouted outside their home. The memory hit him hard. Above them, the drones began activating weapons. Small gun barrels slowly opened beneath their metal bodies. "Final warning," the machine voice echoed through the alley. "Move away immediately." Rain continued falling silently around them. Daniel's breathing became heavier. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to save himself, to let the military take the alien child. But the small girl continued holding his jacket tightly, like he was the only safe thing left in the world. Then Daniel made his choice. He suddenly grabbed the child's hand and ran toward the apartment stairway. Immediately, loud alarms exploded across the alley. "Target moving," the drones announced. "Pursuit authorized." Red lights filled the darkness behind them while mechanical engines screamed through the rain. And somewhere far above the city, something enormous moved through the clouds. Daniel slammed the apartment door shut and quickly locked every metal latch. The small alien child stood behind him, breathing hard while rainwater dripped onto the dirty floor. Outside, the loud sound of drones echoed through the building. Red scanning lights passed across the cracked apartment windows. "Search in progress," a robotic voice announced somewhere outside. Daniel stepped away from the door slowly. His heart was beating so fast that his chest hurt. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The apartment felt painfully small now. One weak ceiling light flickered above the kitchen. Old pipes rattled inside the walls. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The alien child looked around carefully, like she expected danger everywhere. Daniel finally spoke quietly. "Who are you?" The child did not answer. She only stared at him with frightened blue eyes. Then she pointed weakly toward herself. "Lee." "Ra," she whispered softly. Daniel frowned slightly. "Lyra?" The child nodded slowly. Her voice sounded weak and broken, like she had not spoken for a very long time. Daniel walked toward an old storage cabinet and pulled out a small blanket. He handed it carefully to her. At first Lyra looked nervous, like she did not understand why he was helping her. But after a moment, she slowly wrapped the blanket around herself and sat near the wall quietly. Daniel turned on the small television sitting near the kitchen. Static filled the screen for a second before emergency news appeared. A serious-looking reporter spoke quickly while warning symbols flashed behind her. "Military forces continue searching for a dangerous alien survivor, believed to be hiding somewhere inside Sector 12. Daniel looked toward Lyra immediately. The reporter continued speaking. "Citizens are warned that the unidentified life form may be highly dangerous and should not be approached under any circumstances." The screen suddenly changed to blurry security footage. Daniel froze. The footage showed several scientists inside a white laboratory hallway. Alarms flashed everywhere while smoke filled the room. Then something attacked the scientists from the darkness. The video cut away before the creature became visible. "Officials confirm multiple deaths during the laboratory incident," the reporter continued. "The escaped alien remains missing." Daniel slowly looked back toward Lyra again. The small girl looked terrified after seeing the news report. She shook her head quickly while tears formed in her eyes. "No," she whispered softly. "No hurt." Daniel stayed silent. He did not know what to believe anymore. Suddenly, every light inside the apartment turned red for 1 second. A loud warning echoed through the entire building. "Mandatory security search." Daniel immediately turned off the television. Heavy footsteps began moving somewhere downstairs. Not drones this time, humans, soldiers. Lyra quickly stood up and backed away from the door in fear. Daniel moved toward the apartment window carefully and looked outside. Dark military vehicles now blocked both ends of the street below. Armed soldiers moved between buildings carrying large rifles and scanning equipment. More drones circled above the rooftops like hunting animals. Daniel stepped away from the window slowly. This was becoming much bigger than he expected. Then the apartment lights suddenly went out completely. Everything became dark except for the faint neon glow entering through the rain-covered windows. The building became silent, too silent. Then came the sound, thunk. Something heavy landed outside the apartment door. Lyra immediately grabbed the blanket tightly and moved backward. Another sound followed. Scratch. 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 Something metal dragged slowly across the hallway outside. Daniel stopped breathing for a second. The sound moved closer to the door, then suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the apartment again. Daniel carefully reached toward the kitchen drawer and pulled out a small utility knife. It was useless against soldiers or drones, but it was the only weapon he had. Lyra stared toward the door without blinking. Then her glowing blue eyes suddenly widened in fear. Very softly, she whispered one word. Hunter. Before Daniel could ask what that meant, 3 loud knocks hit the apartment door. Bang, bang, bang. Daniel nearly jumped backward. A deep mechanical voice spoke from outside. Citizen Daniel Mercer. Daniel's blood turned cold immediately. How did they know his name? The voice continued. You are harboring illegal alien property. Not child, not survivor, property. Rain continued hitting the windows while the hallway outside remained completely dark. Daniel looked through the small crack beneath the door. At first he saw nothing, then a shadow slowly moved across the hallway floor. It did not look human. The shape was too tall, too thin, and its glowing red eyes were visible even under the door. Lyra suddenly grabbed Daniel's sleeve tightly. Shaking badly, the voice outside spoke again. Open the door willingly. A long metallic scratching sound followed across the wall outside. Then the voice changed slightly, almost like it was smiling. Or we will come inside. And then something outside the door began crawling across the ceiling. The scratching sound above the apartment ceiling suddenly stopped. Complete silence filled the room. Daniel stood frozen near the kitchen while holding the small utility knife tightly. Lyra remained beside him, shaking badly under the blanket. Outside the apartment door, something heavy moved slowly across the hallway ceiling. Metal creaked softly above them, then came a strange clicking sound, like sharp claws touching steel pipes. Daniel's breathing became slower. He tried not to make any sound. The deep mechanical voice outside spoke once more. You cannot hide the asset forever, asset. Again they called her an object instead of a child. Lyra suddenly pulled Daniel's sleeve gently and pointed toward the back wall of the apartment. Daniel looked confused at first, then she pointed lower. Toward the old heating vent near the floor. The vent? Daniel whispered. Lyra nodded quickly. Another loud bang shook the apartment door. This time the metal bent inward slightly. Daniel immediately dropped beside the vent and pulled at the rusted cover. At first it did not move. Then another violent hit slammed against the door outside. Dust fell from the ceiling. Entry authorized, the mechanical voice announced. Daniel pulled harder. Finally the old vent cover broke free with a loud crack. Cold air rushed out from the dark tunnel behind it. Lyra quickly crawled inside first without hesitation. Daniel looked back once toward the apartment door. The metal surface was slowly being cut open from the outside. Bright red sparks filled the hallway cracks. Something was slicing through the door. Daniel quickly climbed into the vent just as a loud metallic scream echoed behind him. The apartment door burst open. Red light flooded the room. Daniel pulled the vent cover shut from inside while trying to stay quiet. Heavy footsteps entered the apartment immediately. For several terrifying seconds, Daniel could hear machines moving through the room outside. Objects crashed onto the floor. Furniture broke apart. Then came the voice again, colder this time. Target recently escaped, another voice answered. Thermal traces moving below the walls. Daniel's stomach tightened. They knew. Lyra crawled deeper into the narrow vent tunnel quickly. Daniel followed behind her while metal echoed around them. The vent system was old, dirty, and barely large enough to move through. Dust filled the air while hot pipes burned beside them. Far behind them, loud crashing sounds exploded through the walls. The hunters were entering the vents too. Daniel crawled faster. His elbows hurt against the rusted metal tunnel. Ahead of him, Lyra suddenly stopped moving. Daniel nearly crashed into her. What happened? He whispered nervously. Lyra pointed downward through a small opening beneath the vent. Daniel carefully looked through it. His eyes widened immediately. Below them was an enormous underground train station. But it did not look normal. The station had been abandoned for years. Old train tracks disappeared into darkness while broken hologram signs flickered weakly above empty platforms. Rainwater dripped from cracked ceilings far above. And dozens of people were hiding down there. Families, workers, children. All hiding silently in the underground station, like refugees during war. Small fires burned inside metal barrels while frightened people whispered nervously to each other. Daniel looked confused. Why were so many people hiding underground? Then suddenly the station speakers turned on with a loud burst of static. Everyone below froze instantly. A robotic city announcement echoed through the underground tunnels. Emergency curfew upgraded to military lockdown. Citizens are ordered to report all suspicious activity immediately. Sector 12 has now entered containment status. Fear spread across the underground station immediately. Some people began crying softly. Others grabbed bags and prepared to run deeper into the tunnels. Then the lights above the station flickered violently. For 1 second, everything went dark. Then emergency red lights activated across the station. Lyra suddenly looked terrified again. No. She whispered quietly. Daniel looked toward her. What is it? Before she could answer, a horrible scream echoed somewhere deep inside the tunnels below. Everyone in the station became silent immediately. Another scream followed, closer this time. Then came gunfire. Rapid automatic gunfire echoed through the darkness beneath the city. People below panicked instantly. Someone shouted, "They're here!" The entire underground station exploded into chaos. Families grabbed children and started running. People pushed each other toward old train tunnels while lights flashed overhead. Daniel quickly helped Lyra out of the vent and onto the platform below. The moment his boots touched the ground, the station lights suddenly died again. Darkness swallowed everything. Only distant red emergency lights remained far down the tunnels. Then came a new sound, slow metal footsteps. Clang, clang, clang. Something huge was walking through the tunnels toward the station. People screamed and ran deeper underground. Daniel grabbed Lyra's hand tightly, out of the darkness ahead. 3 glowing red eyes slowly appeared, not 2, 3. Attached to a massive machine almost large enough to fill the tunnel itself. Its metal body crawled along the walls like a giant spider, while long mechanical limbs scraped against concrete. Searchlights moved across the terrified crowd below. Then the machine spoke using dozens of distorted human voices at once. Target detected. The giant hunter machine suddenly turned all 3 glowing eyes directly toward Daniel and Lyra. And then the train tracks beneath them began shaking violently, because something even larger was moving in the darkness below the station. The underground tracks shook harder every second. Dust fell from the ceiling while terrified people ran through the dark station screaming. The giant hunter machine climbed across the tunnel walls like a metal insect. Its 3 glowing red eyes stayed locked on Daniel and Lyra. Target confirmed, the machine announced through distorted human voices. Long mechanical arms unfolded from its body. Sharp claws scraped against the concrete walls while sparks flew everywhere. Daniel grabbed Lyra's hand tightly and pulled her toward the nearest tunnel. Behind them, the giant machine suddenly attacked. Its claws smashed through the station platform where they had been standing only seconds earlier. Concrete exploded across the air. People screamed and scattered deeper into the underground tunnels. Daniel and Lyra ran through the darkness as fast as they could. Cold air rushed through the tunnel while red emergency lights flashed behind them. The sound of the hunter machine followed closely. Clang, scrape, clang. It moved across the walls and ceiling faster than any human could run. Ahead of them, an old train rested silently on abandoned tracks. Its metal body was covered in rust and dust. Broken windows reflected the flashing red lights behind them. Daniel immediately pulled open one of the old train doors. Inside! He shouted. Lyra climbed into the train quickly while Daniel slammed the heavy door shut behind them. The inside smelled old and wet. Rows of broken seats filled the dark train cars while weak lights flickered above. Daniel moved toward the driver controls desperately. He had no idea if the train still worked behind them. The hunter machine entered the tunnel. Its red scanning lights moved across the outside windows slowly. "Escape route blocked," it announced. Daniel hit random buttons near the control panel. Most of them were dead. Then suddenly one small light turned green. The old train vibrated softly. Daniel's eyes widened. "It still works," he whispered. "Outside." Metal claws smashed against the train roof violently. The hunter machine climbed onto the train itself. Long, sharp legs pierced through the ceiling while passengers screamed inside nearby train cars. Daniel pushed the power lever forward with all his strength. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the ancient train suddenly roared to life. The entire tunnel shook as the wheels screamed against the tracks. Slowly, painfully, the old train began moving forward. The giant machine lost balance briefly on top of the train, but it quickly stabbed its claws deeper into the metal roof. "Pursuit continues," the distorted voices echoed above them. The train accelerated deeper into the underground tunnels. Outside the windows, only darkness rushed past. Broken tunnel lights flashed across the train cars like lightning inside. Frightened survivors cried quietly while holding their families close. One old man looked toward Lyra with fear in his eyes. "She brought those things here," he whispered nervously. Several others heard him immediately. People slowly moved away from Lyra. Fear spread through the train car quickly. Daniel stepped in front of her protectively. "She's just a child," he said firmly, before anyone could answer. A loud metallic crash exploded from the roof above. The hunter machine smashed one of its claws through the ceiling. Passengers screamed as sparks rained everywhere. The claw searched wildly inside the train car, grabbing seats and tearing metal apart. Daniel quickly pulled Lyra toward the next train car while people panicked around them. Another claw burst through the roof ahead of them. Blocking the path, the machine was trapping them. Suddenly, all the train lights shut off completely. Darkness swallowed everything. Only the glowing red eyes above remained visible through the broken ceiling. Then something strange happened. Lyra's hands began glowing softly blue. Daniel stared at her in shock. The glowing lines beneath her skin slowly brightened. At the same moment, every electronic system inside the train suddenly started failing. Lights flickered wildly. Control panels exploded with sparks. The hunter machine above the train began making strange broken sounds. "Seize. Tem. Error." The machine stuttered. Its red eyes flickered rapidly. Lyra looked terrified of her own powers. Sorry," she whispered softly. Then the train suddenly entered a massive underground cavern. Daniel looked outside the window and froze. An entire hidden city existed beneath the real city above. Huge abandoned laboratories filled the underground cavern. Thousands of broken machines stood silently in darkness while giant glass containers lined the walls. Some containers were shattered from the inside. Others still contained shadows moving inside strange blue liquid. The train slowly passed massive words painted across one metal wall. "Project Origin." Daniel's stomach tightened immediately. This place was connected to the experiments. Suddenly the train screeched violently as the tracks ahead ended without warning. The driver alarms exploded loudly through every train car. Track termination detected. Daniel looked ahead in horror. The train was speeding directly toward the edge of a broken bridge hanging over a massive dark pit below. Passengers screamed in panic. The hunter machine above the train finally reactivated fully. All three red eyes turned toward Daniel and Lyra again. Then from somewhere deep inside the endless pit below the broken bridge, a gigantic glowing blue eye slowly opened in the darkness. The gigantic blue eye opened deep beneath the broken bridge. For one terrifying second, everything became silent. Even the hunter machine above the train stopped moving. The glowing eye stared upward from the darkness below like something ancient had just awakened. Daniel grabbed Lyra tightly as the train continued racing toward the broken tracks. Passengers screamed and pushed against each other in panic. "Brace yourselves," Daniel shouted. The old train shook violently while sparks exploded beneath the wheels. Only a few meters remained before the destroyed bridge ended completely. Then suddenly the entire underground cavern trembled. A deep sound echoed from below, not mechanical alive. The massive blue eye slowly disappeared back into the darkness beneath the pit, but something huge was moving down there. The broken train tracks suddenly bent upward violently, as if something beneath them had pushed against the entire cavern floor. The train jumped sideways hard enough to throw passengers across the walls. At the last possible second, the front wheels crashed onto an emergency side rail hidden beside the bridge. The train swerved away from the pit instead of falling directly into it. Metal screamed loudly against metal, while several train cars behind them broke apart and disappeared into the darkness below. The hunter machine lost its balance immediately. One of its long mechanical legs snapped off as it slid across the train roof. "Stability failure," the distorted voices screamed. Daniel watched through the broken ceiling as the giant machine finally lost its grip completely. For 1 second it hung above the endless pit. Its red eyes flickered rapidly. Then the machine fell into the darkness below. Silence followed. A few seconds later, a horrible metallic crunch echoed from far beneath them. Then came another sound, chewing. Daniel's blood turned cold. Something below was eating the machine. The damaged train finally stopped near an old underground platform, covered in dust and broken cables. Emergency lights flashed weakly across the cavern, while smoke filled the air. Survivors slowly climbed out of the damaged train cars. Injured and terrified, some people cried quietly. Others simply stared into the darkness below the bridge. Too shocked to speak, Daniel carefully helped Lyra out of the train. She looked pale and exhausted. The glowing blue lines beneath her skin had faded again. "You okay?" Daniel asked softly. Lyra nodded weakly, but her eyes stayed fixed on the dark pit behind them. Then she whispered something quietly. "Not monster." Daniel frowned. "What?" Lyra looked toward him carefully. "Protector," she whispered. Before Daniel could ask more questions, a loud explosion suddenly echoed somewhere above the underground cavern. Dust rained from the ceiling immediately. Then another explosion followed, closer this time. Military forces had found the underground facility. Red warning lights suddenly activated across the cavern walls. A robotic female voice echoed through hidden speakers. "Facility breach detected. Purge sequence active." Daniel looked around quickly. Old laboratory doors began sealing shut all across the cavern. Large metal barriers dropped from the ceiling while warning sirens filled the underground city. One frightened survivor shouted loudly, "They're going to bury us down here." Panic spread instantly. People began running in every direction, searching for exits. Then all the giant laboratory screens around the cavern suddenly turned on at once. Static filled the monitors before an old recorded video appeared. A scientist stood in front of the camera, looking terrified and exhausted. Behind him, Daniel could see large glass containers holding alien children inside blue liquid. Some were sleeping, some were clearly dead. The scientist spoke quickly into the recording. If anyone finds this facility, you need to know the truth. Explosions echoed again above the cavern, while survivors watched the screen silently. The scientists continued. The government lied about the invasion. They captured alien families years ago during first contact. They experimented on their children here underground. Daniel slowly looked toward Lyra. Tears filled her glowing blue eyes. The scientist's hands were shaking badly now. We tried to stop them, he whispered. But the children developed abilities we couldn't control. One escaped. After that, the others began changing. Suddenly, the video behind the scientist showed shadows moving violently inside nearby glass containers. The scientist turned in fear toward the movement behind him. Then the recording ended abruptly in static. Silence filled the underground cavern again. Nobody spoke. The truth was finally visible to everyone. The invasion had not started because aliens attacked humanity. Humanity had started everything first. Then a deep roar suddenly echoed from somewhere below the pit again. This time much louder, the entire cavern shook violently. Cracks spread across the giant walls while lights exploded overhead. Lyra suddenly looked terrified again. "He waking up," she whispered. Daniel stared toward the darkness below the bridge, slowly. Very slowly. Something enormous began climbing upward from the pit, and far above the underground city, military bombers started dropping explosives directly toward the cavern. The underground cavern shook violently as explosions rained down from above. Massive pieces of concrete crashed from the ceiling while survivors ran through the collapsing facility screaming. Military bombers roared somewhere high above the city. They were trying to erase everything. The laboratories, the evidence, the truth. Daniel grabbed Lyra's hand tightly and pulled her away from the broken train platform. "We need to move now," he shouted, behind them. The endless pit continued shaking. Something gigantic was still climbing upward through the darkness below. A deep roar echoed across the cavern again. Loud enough to shake the metal walls. People panicked immediately. Some survivors rushed toward sealed emergency doors, while others simply froze in fear. Then the old facility speakers suddenly activated again. "Purge detonation in 2-10 minutes. Daniel's stomach tightened. The entire underground city was going to explode. Lyra suddenly pulled his sleeve and pointed toward a narrow service tunnel hidden behind broken laboratory equipment. "Safe way," she whispered. Daniel nodded quickly. Together they ran through the dark tunnel while explosions continued behind them. The service passage was narrow and cold. Old emergency lights flickered weakly along the walls while smoke filled the air. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Daniel noticed strange drawings covering the metal walls. Children had made them, simple drawings of stars. Alien worlds, human soldiers, and giant ships in the sky. Some pictures showed families holding hands, others showed fire and death. Lyra stopped walking for a moment beside one drawing. A small alien child had drawn a picture of Earth beside another glowing blue planet. Below it, messy human writing said, "We only wanted to go home." Daniel felt something heavy inside his chest. These children had never been monsters. Suddenly distant gunfire echoed ahead of them. Daniel immediately pulled Lyra behind a rusted pipe. Voices moved through the tunnel nearby. Human voices, soldiers. "They're somewhere below this sector," one soldier said nervously. Another answered. "Command says kill witnesses if necessary." Daniel's eyes narrowed. Even now the military still cared more about hiding the truth than saving people. Then another voice spoke quietly. "What if the recordings are real?" Silence followed for a moment. The first soldier answered coldly. "Doesn't matter anymore." Heavy footsteps moved away through the tunnel. Daniel slowly exhaled, but before he could move again, Lyra suddenly looked upward fearfully. A low humming sound echoed through the tunnel walls. Not bombs, not drones, something much larger. The sound grew louder every second. Then every light inside the tunnel suddenly turned blue. Daniel looked confused. The glowing light moved through cracks in the ceiling like sunlight underwater. Outside the tunnel, alarms suddenly exploded across the entire facility. Unknown vessels detected. Unknown vessels detected. Lyra's glowing blue eyes widened. "They hear," she whispered softly. Daniel followed her toward a damaged maintenance ladder leading upward. Together they climbed quickly through smoke and fallen dust. After several minutes, they finally reached a broken surface hatch. Daniel forced the heavy metal door open. Cold night air hit his face immediately. He climbed out onto the roof of an abandoned industrial building. Then he froze completely. The entire city below had gone silent. Cars stopped in the streets. Military vehicles stood frozen. Even drones hovered motionless in the sky. Everyone was staring upward. Daniel slowly looked toward the clouds above Earth, and his heart nearly stopped. Gigantic alien ships filled the sky, hundreds of them. Massive dark shapes hovered above the city clouds, while glowing blue lights moved across their surfaces like flowing water. The ships were so enormous, they blocked entire sections of the night sky. People across rooftops and streets stared upward in terrified silence. No attacks came, no weapons fired. The ships simply waited above Earth quietly. Then every screen across the city suddenly activated at once. Phones, billboards, military monitors, building displays. A single message appeared everywhere: return the children. Panic spread instantly through the streets below. Military sirens screamed across the city, while fighter aircraft rushed into the sky. Daniel looked toward Lyra slowly. Tears filled her eyes again. "Family," she whispered. Then suddenly a loud explosion erupted far below the streets. The underground facility finally began collapsing completely. A gigantic shape burst upward through the city roads several blocks away. Concrete and metal exploded into the air while civilians screamed and ran. Daniel saw glowing blue eyes rise from the smoke. The giant creature from beneath the pit had reached the surface, but it was not attacking civilians. Instead, it turned toward the military drones surrounding the city, and with one earth-shaking roar, the creature attacked the machines above them. The alien ships slowly began descending through the clouds. And for the first time in human history, Earth stood seconds away from either peace or total war. The sky above the city burned with blue light. Gigantic alien ships hovered between the clouds, while military aircraft circled around them like insects. Below, streets were filled with panic, smoke, and screaming civilians trying to escape the chaos. The enormous creature from beneath the underground pit moved through the city, destroying military drones one after another. Every roar shook nearby buildings. Daniel stood on the rooftop beside Lyra, while cold wind pushed rain across the city again. The alien child stared up at the giant ships with tears in her glowing eyes. "They came for you," Daniel said quietly. Lyra nodded slowly, but before either of them could move, a loud metallic sound echoed behind them. Click. Daniel turned immediately. A squad of armed soldiers stood at the rooftop entrance, aiming rifles directly at them. At the center stood a tall officer wearing black combat armor. Unlike the others, he looked calm, cold, like everything happening below meant nothing to him. General Voss, the man responsible for Project Origin. He stepped forward slowly while helicopters moved across the stormy sky behind him. "You caused quite a disaster," Voss said calmly. Daniel moved protectively in front of Lyra. "She's just a child," he answered angrily. Voss looked toward Lyra without emotion. "No," he said quietly. "She is evidence." Lightning flashed across the rooftop. The soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons, far above them. One of the alien ships slowly descended lower between the clouds. Its glowing blue lights reflected across the rain-covered buildings below. Lyra stared at the ship silently. Voss noticed immediately. "You think they came peacefully?" he asked. Then he smiled slightly. "They didn't." Voss pressed a small button on his wrist device. Suddenly, every giant screen across nearby buildings activated again. Daniel looked up in shock. Missiles. Dozens of hidden nuclear missiles were rising from underground launch stations across the city. Civilians below began screaming in terror. Vos looked toward the sky proudly. "If humanity falls tonight," he said coldly, "then everything falls with us." Daniel's blood turned cold. The man was insane. Lyra suddenly stepped beside Daniel and spoke softly. "No more death, for the first time." Vos actually looked surprised hearing her speak clearly. Then his face hardened again. "You creatures destroyed Earth first," he snapped. Lyra shook her head slowly, tears running down her face. "No," she whispered. "You hurt children. For one brief second." Silence filled the rooftop. Even some soldiers looked uncertain now. Then alarms suddenly exploded from Vos's wrist device. "Warning!" a robotic voice shouted. "Unauthorized access detected." Vos's expression changed instantly. Every missile launch screen around the city suddenly shut off. Daniel looked confused, then all nearby screens changed again. The hidden laboratory recordings appeared publicly across the entire city. Every crime, every experiment, every captured alien child. The truth was now visible to the whole world. Citizens below watched in horror while military communications erupted in panic. Several soldiers slowly lowered their weapons. One of them looked directly at Vos. "You lied to us," he whispered. Vos's calm expression finally disappeared. "You idiots," he shouted angrily. "They are not human." Suddenly, Vos pulled a hidden pistol and aimed directly at Lyra. Daniel reacted instantly. He charged forward just as the gun fired. Bang! The bullet missed Lyra by inches and shattered part of the rooftop wall behind her. Daniel slammed into Vos hard enough to throw both men onto the wet rooftop floor. The pistol slid away into the rain. The two struggled violently while thunder shook the sky above them. Vos grabbed Daniel by the throat angrily. "You ruined everything." He screamed. Daniel barely managed to breathe. Then suddenly blue light filled the rooftop. Lyra stood nearby with glowing energy surrounding her small hands. The rain itself seemed frozen around her. Vos stared at her in fear for the first time. Lyra looked heartbroken, not angry. Then she raised her glowing hand slowly. Every weapon on the rooftop suddenly shut down at once. Rifles, drones, helicopters above them, all dead. The alien ship above descended lower until it hovered directly over the rooftop. A beam of soft blue light reached down toward Lyra. Her people were waiting. Daniel slowly stood up while rain continued falling around them. Lyra looked toward him quietly. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then the small alien girl suddenly hugged him tightly. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment after everything that happened. She still felt like nothing more than a scared child looking for safety. "Thank you," Lyra whispered softly. Daniel smiled sadly. "You'll be safe now," he answered. Lyra slowly stepped into the blue light. Her glowing figure began rising toward the giant ship above. The storm clouds slowly started clearing around the city. Military forces below stopped fighting. Civilians watched silently from the streets. For the first time in years, the city became quiet again. Just before disappearing inside the ship, Lyra looked down toward Daniel one final time, then she smiled. And the giant alien ship slowly rose back into the clouds. Leaving Earth behind, years later, during another cold, rainy night, Daniel still lived in the same old apartment near the industrial district. Life had changed after the truth became public, wars ended, the government collapsed, and humans finally learned they were not alone in the universe. Most nights the city remained peaceful now. But sometimes Daniel still looked up at the stars, wondering if Lyra remembered him too. Then one quiet night, a soft knock echoed outside his apartment door. Knock, knock. Daniel slowly opened the door, and there, sitting quietly in the rain, was a small glowing blue device, along with a single message shining softly across its surface. Family never forgets.